So, I'm going to ask you a few questions about today, about what you mean, about the theme. So let me start maybe with you, Daniela. So you told me that this is about mimicry. Yeah? We talked yesterday about this, and I'm very interested in your thoughts about that. Like, what do you mean by that?
Do I have to stay close to you? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we named, the three of us named the performance mimicry. I think it was Marko who came up with the idea, because we have been like digging into this not only biomimicking of technology, like technology biomimicking the world, so it relates to us somehow, because this robot could have been built in any other form, but this form triggers certain emotions in us. Do you hear me? Or yeah?
It's just for the camera.
Ah, okay.
That is no problem.
That's good to know. And and then we were the first performance that we did in Linz last year for the night, Lange Nacht der Wissenschaft, Long Night of Science. Marko was doing this mimicking the robot. And then we thought about this idea of what does it mean to mimic technology, or how is technology mimicking the world? And how can we get close and relate to technology through mimicking it, or it through mimicking us? And I mean, that's how the idea of mimicry came about, I think. I don't know if you want to say anything else.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about the relationships that we are building as humans to each other, and also with animals, with other species, and how we communicate through verbal or non-verbal communication, through music, sound, body movement. So I think the performativity and performance practice in that sense can open a lot of fields for experiment and for challenging these type of communications. So in that way, we got engaged in the project. Laura and me, we were invited by Daniela to join this research project, and we were thinking how performance art from our position can interfere in this type of technology. So for me personally, what was interesting, but also it's a good point for discussion as well, what we talked about all the time, it's a background of the technology. As this robot was built as a military weapon. It was built by Boston Dynamics, and it was used in the combat. So then we think about the purpose of that technology and our obligations, in which way we interact in this type of technology. So now with this prototype, so this is prototype, through the university, this technology is introduced for industry. So now it's getting used more and more in construction site planning, as it has certain applications and possibilities to reach certain places which could be dangerous for humans, for example. And in that sense, we were thinking about those steps and concepts for which type of engagement this technology is used. So we approached as an artist. So we were thinking what would be creative thoughts, creative planning, in sense how to engage in creative and inspiring way, maybe for the purpose of performing or opening dialogue about about this machinery, what we are doing now.
Thank you. Okay, I immediately have a question, I think, about that. Namely, you were reading I think the rules of what not to do about the robot, right? And it seems to be that you were very much in dialogue with that and not very much agreeing with that. Like you did things that I think where the rules were forbidding you to do that, right? Like I heard 2 meters, I saw much closer encounters with the robot. So why did you read those rules? I was very interested in that.
Well, when we were working with the robot, of course we were like trying to figure out how it works, and so we read the manual. And then these manuals, they're not very useful because there's all this security stuff in there that kind of like limits the possibilities of what you can use Spot for to almost like very, very limited. Yeah. And I found that interesting that you build a machine that has like this huge potential, and then nevertheless, because of like making sure, like this thought of security, you write like this stupidity, like keep away 2 meters. Of course, I mean, some of the rules make sense, but like also the contradiction, I found it interesting, the contradiction between, you know, the robot was built as a weapon, kind of, and there it kind of like approaches people and gets much closer than the 2 meters. And then I wonder in which context this 2 meter setup would be thought about, or what it could be used for then. Maybe the construction site where there's no people around, but apart from that, I don't see so many options. And I kind of like that contradiction of like also, I think when we see the robot, we empathize with it. It's not really a living being, or it's not a living being. I think that's not up for debate. But nevertheless, we feel like it's, you know, like a dog. And it's very similar to also how we relate sometimes to a dog, because there we think the dog smiles. And I think maybe in the performance, or at least that was what I was trying to evoke sometimes, was like the dog is happy maybe, or the robot is happy. I'm even calling it the dog already. Yeah, yeah. Because we make these patterns, and there, of course it is built that way, but this like recognizing animal-like structures, and in animals recognizing ourselves, I think this relation is very interesting, of how we relate to ourselves by finding other things similar. Like we also say sometimes that the car smiles, or it has a face, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Let me ask also another question about that. Namely, all of you are very much trying to interfere with something that it is not. Like it's military technology, and you want to use it for something else. Maybe I ask this to you, do you have what is your mission behind that? Like, what is the mission behind the project that you are using this technology, this robotic technology for? Like, what's the broader mission?
So this project is a research project on art, performance, and digitalization of information. So what we are trying to figure out is how does the body, through the senses, for example, aesthetically, make sense of a situation in which data or whatever is being digitalized. And these tools are used for digitalization of information. So when you have, for example, a working process and information is being digitalized, then we ask ourselves, how does the body make sense of that, and where does the body end up? Like, where is the body while it is being digitalized? And this is, I mean, also what you were saying, it's very interesting to see how the technology is used. In the original project, we are not asking it out of a political perspective. The three of us are asking it out of a political perspective, because it is, I mean, you cannot really work with a tool that has been produced by the military and that is being now currently used at frontiers, with artistically, without talking about this, without saying like, this is what is happening. So how does how does this performance aesthetically or sensibly make you feel around a technology that has been produced with that goal?
Yeah.
And if you see it and you react to it with empathy, because we all kind of do, or you can be empathic or you can be scared. I mean, those are the two general reactions to this machine. And if you are scared, there's generally a little part of you that thinks like, no, this is not scary. It's playing with us. It's looking at us. It's, you know, you can touch it and you can play with it and it's not gonna hurt you. Nothing's gonna happen. So this is where we were coming from this like, how does the body make sense of the situation, and how do we relate to this sort of technology?
Yeah. Thank you. Then I'm gonna ask one last small question, and then the floor is open for maybe 2-3 questions. I just wanted to relate to this being scared, and I think a lot of people have, when it comes to robotics, a fear of replacement. So I want to ask you, Marko, at some point you seem to be a bit tired, or like it was stronger than you, or did I see this wrongly?
Yeah, that's true. I'm not so much in shape as a machine. Did my best, okay. But joke on the side. I think it's important when we have possibility to engage in machine as such, or other types of technology that are absolutely on the rise, and there's a lot of conversations in public sphere today about artificial technology and its expansion. I think it's good to engage in the process. For example, when we were trying out functionalities of this robot, we learned a lot. We learned a lot about this technology, and from that point we also learned how to protect ourselves in terms if we get encountered within confrontation. Yeah. That could not be fun as we were doing it today.
Yeah. Thank you. Then I'll be walking around, I think. That's the idea, yeah. So if somebody has a question, raise your hand and I'm coming to you. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for. Well, thanks a lot. I was actually wondering, because the military compound developed this project especially in mind as a dog, because you desensitize the fear, right? And you desensitize people, that you actually foster the relationship between the animal and then the person. So I was wondering, I mean, through performances and through your artwork, how do you avoid desensitizing even more? And how do you approach it critically, that you lose this distance between a weapon and surveillance technology, for example, and people?
Who is the question?
Anyone.
I can say something. Okay. Okay, you want to say something too? Okay, just shortly. Thank you. I think this is a really crucial question, and that we should be asking ourselves with almost every kind of technology that we're using. Because actually, in my opinion, there's little technology that is not being produced with a political end, with a political or social or military end. And for example, during the performance, we thought a lot about the reading of the dangers. We were talking about it before. So Laura was reading the dangers, but if you listen closely, they are not protecting the people that are using it. They are protecting themselves. Boston Dynamics is making that manual so they can protect themselves in case of an accident. So you cannot sue them if something happens. And this is already something. If you listen closely to what Laura is saying, it makes no sense. because it has nothing to do with the 2 meters. It has not what we were talking about before. So it is a critical involvement with that. And on the other side, I think it's really important to misshape the technology. So it's difficult because if you think like, okay, I'm going to use a very military, deadly technology in art and change its meaning, you are still using it. You are still showing it to the world with another face and with a friendlier one or whatever. So this is a proximity to technology that we need to care about, to think about.
There is one last question, a possibility for one last question, if somebody wants the last question. Yeah, okay.
I'm very interested in the motions that you used. The motion and the relation of the human motion, especially with you and you, to the machine. Both of you were most of the time firstly following the robot and secondly in symmetry to the robot. Was this a deliberate decision and is there a message behind? And last part, especially to you, the situation. So you lying on the floor and the dog robot above you is a very special situation. You are female, obviously, and I wonder what the message here is, because this is especially in times where gender and topics of feminism and sexual orientations and all these kinds of things are on a very high stake discussion. So this is the background of the second part of my question. So first part is the question of symmetry in motion between machine and you, because what you show with this is an equivalence between the two, which could be totally different from an artist's perspective. And the second thing, I'm especially interested in the body aspect and the gender aspect, machine, female. Thank you.
Who wants to start? Yeah?
I mean, I think that the movement, the mimicking or the mirroring each other, I think that was a process of us like relating to the technology, like what are the similarities and what are the differences. And it was a deliberate decision, for example, to show the borders of both. You could see, I think, although you could see a kind of like synchronization, that the range of movement of the robot is nowhere near Marko's range of movement. But then again, like I set it down and put it up and set it down and put it up, and of course the machine never exhausts. So I think these, as long as they're, yeah. And that was, I think, about my perspective on the mimicking.
Yeah, you have one last comment?
Yeah, I think I will also comment on mirroring, actually. So we were creating a situation of mirroring in relationship of human and machine. So this comes in terms when what we talked about it at the beginning, what is triggering or activating our empathy, can be empathic towards this kind of technology, yes or no. This depends about from person to person, about the individuality of the person. So when we observe certain action, then we are getting in compassionate relationship. So in that way, we are entering in empathic correspondence to each other. So this was the idea of mimicking or mirroring what we were doing when human is imitating machine. Of course, the body will get exhausted. I mean, if there was a super athlete here with us also, this would be the point of endurance performance. In other sense, when we were switching the role and position, when human, me, performer, was doing some kind of movements with the body, then machine was imitating human. But of course, we need to know that behind every machine there is a human. So there was a controller, there was a joystick with a person that was navigating this technology. So I think the moral and ethical question in overall, who has the control over such technology? And I think this can be related as well on the second part of your question.
You want
Yeah,
to add?
yeah.
It's
For
your
the
bit,
second
so-
part, and maybe for that, what Marko just said, I think also an important aspect is translational processes in all this technology, because like translation errors or what is lost in translation, I think is a very interesting topic philosophically. And that was also something we were thinking about, like how do you, because I control the robot, but the robot mimics Marko, and then it's like a loop in a kind of like loop where you see translational processes happening in many places, and also the errors that occur, which I liked. And for the second part of the question with the lying under the dog, actually I didn't conceptualize it with the gender aspect in mind. For me, it was an interesting contradiction between the security, like reading, I started out with reading the security rules, and then I found like lying underneath the robot was something we tried out when we were playing around with it, and then I found it a nice contradiction, and also a little bit of a contradiction to the controlling the robot and then being kind of like, well, I'm underneath it. It's a little bit, even though I know nothing will happen, it's always a little bit like, I don't know, it could collapse, it could move in an unpredictable way or something. But thinking about it from a female perspective, or I am a woman, that is correct. I think for me it was interesting also to switch through many roles throughout the whole thing, because the security guidance is like the strict entity kind of, but then also I was a slave master for a little bit. Like I controlled the robot, and like we had moments when we were rehearsing where I was enjoying it when Marko was getting a little bit tired. And I also found that position of power that I have in that moment when I'm controlling the robot is like an interesting opposite to then being very passive and underneath it.
Okay, thanks all of you, and big applause for the performance.